I know 3 NFL games is not the largest sample size in the world, but there are things starting to identify themselves as trends within the fantasy football realm, even within the short time frame that we have to start paying attention to, and are causing quite a stir around the fantasy football community. And today we're playing a very fun game that's popular amongst many fantasy football creators called trending or ending, where we look at these trends that I've identified in this video and see if they are going to be prevalent for fantasy football for a whole season-long stretch and something we should believe in for the rest of the next 14 games, or if they're going to be ending sooner rather than later, and we need to wise up before our fellow league mates and get off of them before it is too late to capitalize. So as always, like the video, comment down below what you think of these particular trends, subscribe to the channel if you are new here, and I'll go ahead and cue that intro. Welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football, where we're playing the game show today, trending or ending. And we're taking a look at nearly 20 players today that are wildly different than where we anticipated them coming into the season, whether they're outperforming their ADP or underperforming their ADP, what trends that these players are setting with their performance over the first 3 weeks. And, we'll dive into the age-old question of is correlation actually causation? Is this something that, is it truly because of this player's individual talent level, or is there a situation or underlying factors that we have to identify that might not be telling the whole truth based on a draft player's current ADP? So that should be a fun discussion to get into, and we have quite a lot of players to talk about today. So without further ado, let's jump into our first one, and how, after week 3, can we not talk about the talk of the town, the name in Hollywood lights? It's going to be running back 1 on the season, running back 1 for the Miami Dolphins in Raheem Mostert. I mean, what an incredible performance by the Dolphins in week 3, throwing up a 70-burger on the Broncos. And one of the most prevalent performers in that game was Raheem Mostert, scoring over 150 combined yards and 4 touchdowns. And this is a guy that, coming into the season, not a lot of people had on their radar. If you were a savvy person listening to this channel, you knew to pick him up at the end of drafts. I got him everywhere in the round 12, round 13 of my drafts, and it's been paying off in massive dividends. Even if you drafted earlier in August and even late July, there's a lot of talk about Devon Achane breaking out or Jeff Wilson coming in and being the RB1. So Raheem Mostert in those leagues probably went undrafted. And this is a guy that goes from potentially undrafted or a late round draft pick to the number 1 overall running back through 3 weeks. But is this a performance that we can continue to keep up from Raheem Mostert? As we talked about before Jeff Wilson was put on IR, he was talked about as potentially being the running back 1 in this offense. And obviously with Jeff Wilson on IR, Raheem Mostert is going to be the guy that takes over that lead back position. But, IR, the initial IR time frame is coming up. We have a lot of players we're going to talk about that return after week 4. So it's something we have to be concerned about. Well, Mike McDaniels and the coaching staff with the Miami Dolphins, when they're talking about putting Jeff Wilson on IR, kind of the air of the conversation sounded like, we'll see if this is something that if he could return at some point this season. They didn't seem like they were very confident with him coming back right after that 4-week period or, anytime in the near future. So this could be an injury with Jeff Wilson that keeps him out for 8 weeks or longer, but we have to keep in mind that maybe Jeff Wilson comes back. Also, we saw rookies always take a long while to ramp up. And obviously, Raheem Mostert had great utilization in the first 2 games, but in week 1, Devon Achane had 0% of snaps. And in week 2, Devon Achane, he had 10% of snaps. In week 3, as he got more acclimated to this offense, Devon Achane's role really ramped up within the Miami Dolphins offense, being on the field for 41% of snaps. But again, we have to, look at the depth. This has always been a Miami Dolphins offensive scheme that rotates in a lot of backs, and we saw Salvon Ahmed was out for he was out in week 3 of against the Broncos. So he started out with 28%. Week 2, he was around 11%, and in week 3, he obviously was on the field for 0% of snaps. So Devon Achane's increase in usage has correlated with Salvon Ahmed's decrease in usage. I don't know if we'll see Salvon Ahmed come back. He's back at practice today, but it seems that Raheem Mostert's usage has stayed consistent, being around 47% of snaps in all 3 games, while the fluctuation in snap percentage comes between De'Von Achane and Salvon Ahmed. While I don't think this is going to be a huge impact, I don't think the correlation of De'Von Achane's increased usage is going to be directly correlating to a negative decrease for Raheem Mostert. I think it's showing that it's negatively going to impact maybe Jeff Wilson coming back or Salvon Ahmed coming back. But, it might eat into his snaps a little bit as the season goes on. And also, as people have so wisely pointed out, this is an offense that the primary focus will always be on the pass, and there was such a heavy utilization for both Achane and Mostert in week 3. Well, because Waddle was out dealing with concussion symptoms and still had not cleared concussion protocol. So when Waddle comes back, you might see a little bit more of the offense revolve around the passing game, and that's totally fair. But even when Waddle's on the field, even in less run favorable game scripts like week 1 and week 2, we still saw a lot of utilization for Raheem Mostert. And the one thing I want to do is we'll talk about the eye test a couple times today. And the eye test is seeing when we got into those short, the goal to go situations, when you're 5 yards in from the end zone, Raheem Mostert was getting that goal line work and he looked good. He was breaking tackles, he was being physical, and he was fighting his way into the end zone. Now, I don't know if that's such a statement that's how good Mostert is, or if it's a derogatory statement to how bad the defensive line of the Broncos is. But overall, I think even with Achane's increased workload, as we talked about, Mostert will still get a lot of goal line snaps and still be valuable in that aspect of the offensive play calling. So as long as he can stay healthy, I do believe this is a trend we have to pay attention to, and he's in line to finish, around RB 5, 6, 7 as being part of this dynamic offense if he can stay healthy. Let's move on to number 2. We only have to move a few spots down the current RB depth chart as we look at running back number 3 on the season, and that's going to be Kenneth Walker the third. And this one's really fun to dive into because over the past 2 games, he has had 2 rushing TDs, which boosts his value, especially in game 2 when he only had 41 rush yards on 17 attempts, giving him only a little bit. His average per carry was only slightly over 2 yards per carry. So that is a little concerning. Obviously, the yards per carry and efficiency ramped up quite a bit as he totaled over 90 rush yards in week 3, but that was against the Seattle Seahawks defensive line. That does leave a lot to be desired. And efficiency was always something that he struggled with both his rookie season last year and through the first 2 weeks this season. So hopefully week 3 is a sign of things to come. But it does cause me a little bit of concern. And if he didn't get those 2 rushing TDs, we would be talking about a bust week for Kenneth Walker. When it comes to week 2 with only getting 31 yards on the ground and really not being that effective in the pass game either. So the rushing TDs have really, really inflated Kenneth Walker's value higher than people would normally put it on. I mean, you're not going to get 2 rushing touchdowns per game, and thinking that he's going and counting for that going forward with his average points per game, I think is probably a little bit of a fallacy that you're falling into. You have to kind of, remove 6 to 8 points off of this to, actually be predictive of what Kenneth Walker can produce going forward. I also want to point out that there's still a ton of very high draft capital involved in Zach Charbonnet, and we don't know when his usage will ramp up. Same thing when we talked about De'Von Achane. It takes a while for these rookies to get involved in offenses, and they don't hit the ground running. Kenneth Walker didn't hit the ground running last year with Rashad Penny as the incumbent, but at some point, just given the fact that they've utilized. I'm still a little miffed at Pete Carroll for that one, but they utilized a 2nd round draft pick on Zach Charbonnet. He will be involved in this offense at some point, especially some of the unique things he can do at the running back position, given that he is generally seen as a better pass catcher than Kenneth Walker and a better goal line back. But the positive things for Kenneth Walker, he has been getting the workhorse workload of this offense. It wasn't an immediate split backfield like a lot of people were predicting coming into this season. And he's been getting a lot more goal line work than he did last year. And that was one of the biggest complaints people had about Kenneth Walker's performance in 2022, was that he was inefficient on the goal line. Well, he's been getting the ball at the goal line, and, we saw he plowed it in for 2 touchdowns in each of the past 2 games. So that's something that, really is good to see from Kenneth Walker, as he's greatly improved that one aspect of his game that a lot of people had gripes with. And the thing is, when he gets on the goal line, that's just what Pete Carroll's identity is. His identity for the offense is to establish the run and run the ball hard. This is why, people were yelling, "Let Russ cook," because he would never actually let Russ cook. He wanted the running the running backs and the running game to be the heart and soul and the identity of his offense. So there will always be a place for Seattle Seahawks running backs at the top of fantasy football. And with Kenneth Walker getting his current workload, that is incredible. So as long as Kenneth Walker stays healthy, even with Zach Charbonnet potentially working in at the latter half of the season, I think the trend of Kenneth Walker as a top 12 running back, as an RB1 for the season, continues, and he finishes as a top 10 running back. Moving on to our third running back here I want to talk about is going to be Zach Moss. He currently slots in, even with missing one game, after 2 games, he slots in as the RB13 on the season, which is pretty impressive considering some of the names that, people have talked about as these generational players at the running back position. He has had massive utilization. I mean, we're talking about guys that people who were drafted in the first 3 rounds of fantasy drafts not having near the same utilization as Zach Moss. Something I pointed out earlier this season was Tony Pollard was never going to be a true workload guy. He's a guy that was based off explosivity, but he needs rest. And he had only been over 70% of snaps one time in the 2022 season. Well, so far in 2023, Zach Moss in week 2, he had 98. He was on the field for 98% of snaps. And in week 3, he was on the field for 76% of snaps. That is an elite metric, more than 95% of other fantasy running backs. So just the sheer volume he's getting is incredible. But the big question here is, and if Jonathan Taylor had been traded, then Zach Moss would have been a smash top 10 running back for the rest of the season. But we don't know how the Jonathan Taylor saga will play out because, like I said, this is an offense that's really clicking under Shane Steichen. He's done a lot to improve, the offensive line play with the Colts. The offensive line looks much, much improved from 2022. Shane Steichen has the offense really clicking, even whether it's Gardner Minshew or the rookie Anthony Richardson coming in. They both look to be running very competent offenses that are moving the ball at an efficient pace and being in the top half of efficiency, or offensive efficiency metrics for PFF. But the whole question is on Jonathan Taylor. If Taylor comes back, Moss is droppable. But if Taylor does not come back, well, that's when I hold true with this, this good offense and this elite usage makes him a top 12 running back. But I don't know anything. I'm not an insider, but I get the rumblings just seeing on Twitter. We saw Jonathan Taylor last week post a video working out in the Colts facility with Colts gear on. He comes back from the PUP list in 1 week, one more game that he misses. And without any, I haven't heard any rumors of him being traded or sitting out again. There's been no rumblings, no press releases. So if I had to guess, Jonathan Taylor is going to be suiting up for the Colts in week 5, and that's going to absolutely eviscerate Zach Moss's value. So, if you can salvage him winning without this week, I think I would probably try to trade him now before you get Jonathan Taylor coming back in week 5. Let's scroll down quite a bit down the board. We look at running back number 33. That's going to be Javonte Williams. Will he get better, or will the trend of his mediocrity continue? The Browns are giving me flashbacks of the Urban Meyer Jaguars. They are that dysfunctional. But can Javonte be successful in a dysfunctional offense? I do think so. It's not even a year. It's almost a year to the day, but it's still less than a year than he removed from his horrific injury where he not only tore his ACL, but his MCL and strained his PCL as well. This is an injury that lingered and impacted J.K. Dobbins for over 2 years. I believe that he still isn't 100%, and despite the confidence, despite his Wolverine-esque healing that he's so far displayed and his ability to be out on the field, I still think he's not totally 100%. I think as the season goes on, he will get healthier, his usage and workload will increase, and he will build much more confidence in his knee and his cutting ability, and he will become much more productive for the NFL and for fantasy football. Right now, just to give you some of those metrics, his usage is around 41 to 42%, and he's seeing 11 to 13 attempts per game. But again, as I expect him to get healthier, and I expect him to develop more confidence in his run and show that his knee is durable, I expect that those attempts to go up to the high teens, and with more volume becomes more fantasy points and more opportunities to score and whatnot. So I do think this is Javonte Williams. If you can ride out this rough patch here at the beginning. They've also played a couple really good defenses, so I expect Javonte Williams. I expect this bad trend for Javonte Williams to end and him to increase in fantasy rankings in the near future. Moving down a little bit more down the board, let's talk about the running back 46 on the season through 46 through 3 weeks is Najee Harris. This is bad. This is really, really bad. We talked about the eye test earlier with Raheem Mostert. Well, guess what? You know what the eye test is telling me with Najee? Is that he is washed. Everything I see when he touches the ball is extremely concerning. He looks lethargic, he looks slow, and he's missing any sort of explosivity that he might have demonstrated in his first year or two in the NFL. He can break tackles. He's great at breaking tackles. But you know why? It's because he's not evading any tackles. He has to break tackles. Otherwise, he'd be tackled behind the line of scrimmage every single time he got the ball. So maybe he has good metrics when it comes to broken tackles, but it's not because of any sort of positive talent on Najee's aspect. There is a massive outcry by the Steelers fans and also by the fantasy community in general to get Warren more involved and get him more touches out of the backfield for the Steelers. And I don't think I can really object to that, as because, again, we talk about the eye test. He looks way more explosive and way more dynamic when he has the ball in his hands. I think personally, this is going to be a very, very rough year for Najee. And this abysmal production so far through 3 weeks, it's not going to end anytime soon. And it's a trend that we should see this as a sign of things to come. Moving down to the last running back I want to talk about today, it's going to be the running back 30 so far fantasy football through 3 weeks, and that is Dameon Pierce of the Houston Texans. Unlike Najee, I cannot put this performance solely on Dameon's talent and skill alone. There's a lot of things we have to talk about here and break down with the situation that Dameon Pierce is in with the Houston Texans. First off, historically, running backs in offenses that are helmed by rookies generally don't tend to produce for fantasy football. Even with someone that's shown a very quick adaptation to the NFL, like CJ Stroud, as he's a top 5 passer in the NFL through 3 weeks, but it just hasn't really worked out for Najee and the running backs. And it's just, again, rookie quarterbacks historically fantasy don't lend themselves to fantasy relevant running backs, and that's certainly holding true with Dameon Pierce. The offensive line, for all intents and purposes, despite having Laramie Tunsil there, is genuinely horrific. It's the worst offensive line in the football and is doing no favors for Dameon Pierce whatsoever. Let me bring out a stat for you from week 2. Dameon Pierce in week 2 finished with 31 yards on the game. His yards after contact was 38. Something is wrong there. He is getting hit repeatedly behind the line. He's having to fight for positive yards on every single time he touches the ball. And in week 3, yes, he put up 13 points in half PPR. He was saved by a TD. But if he doesn't get that TD upside, we saw in week 1 or week 2 with wildly inefficient run play, especially from considering the state of the offensive line, it's going to be a very, very rough year for Dameon Pierce. Let's move on to the quarterback position. And let's talk about the quarterback for the season, which is going to be Jordan Love. This man just succeeds. He just continues to win and continues to conduct an offense that is efficient. Now, I get it. The first half against the Saints wasn't what we wanted to see from him NFL-wise or fantasy-wise. But again, this is an NFL defense that I think is really, really good this year. They're performing top 10 across all defensive metrics, passing, rushing, whatever. And they've been very, very stout giving up fantasy points. So, it wasn't something that I was totally unprepared for, seeing him struggle against that Saints defense. And he does have some awkward moments. Yes, people are going to bring up him in week 2, slipping, trying to take the snap, and he's had some bad overthrows. But this is his first year starting in the NFL. He's going to have his mistakes. Despite not being rookie, he will have his rookie mistakes. Let's just all be patient, but he has shown some moments of brilliance. And if you listen to PFF, like I do, there is some good information in there, but there's also some things that I think they really harp on that don't generally work for us as far as fantasy football people, that they put a little bit too much stake in certain things. So overall, I believe he's graded like the PFF quarterback number 18. And as I say, he's just average play, but he's getting a lot of favors from the offensive scheme he's in, from the playmakers of Luke Musgrave, Aaron Jones, Romeo Doubs, Samari Torre, Tavian Wicks even. But guess what? PFF grades don't count for fantasy points. All the facts of the situation that he's been put in do. So it doesn't matter. And this is why we were really high on him in the offseason, why he was a trade low candidate, why I went out and packaged Garrett Wilson in Dynasty to go out. Obviously, I didn't do a 1-for-1 swap, but I put Garrett Wilson out and brought back a haul of picks as well as Jordan Love in a Superflex league, mind you. Because the situation is so good, because he is under one of the brightest offensive minds in the NFL with Matt LaFleur, and he is a guy that can continue to drive production for this offense, which is generally going to lead to fantasy points for the quarterback, whoever is at, is either the mercy or the beneficiary of a good offense or a bad offense. And right now, Jordan Love is the beneficiary of a good offense. And he doesn't even have Watson or Jones for the past 2 games. Think about how much better his performance is going to be when he has Watson to throw to, when he's able to do dump offs to Aaron Jones and get the yak yards from those screen passes. So also I wanted to point out with not only just the fact that Matt LaFleur is the one commandeering his offense and putting him in a good situation, but he's in the NFC North. They get to play the Bears twice, they get to play the Vikings twice, they get to play the Lions twice, plus they get to play a very easy NFC schedule. I think, the defenses that he faces generally are going to put him in a place for success going forward. And, if he's still on your waiver wire, a guy I would definitely pick up. But from the QB4, let's talk about the QB1, Mr. Kirk Cousins. Yeah, I'm not going to be surprised if this continues on. And I guess if I have to spell it out for you, yes, I'm saying the trend of Jordan Love being a top quarterback in fantasy this year, I think it does continue. Top 10, I think that's what he finishes on the season. But Kirk Cousins, I would not be surprised if he finishes as quarterback 1. There is everything here that gives him, the secret sauce to put up an insane number of fantasy points. Honestly, he's on track to break the passing yardage marks. I think after this week, it was either after week 2 or week 3, he was on track to throw for over 6,000 yards. That is unreal, but it's the situation that the Minnesota Vikings have put him on. The running game is subpar. Alexander Mattison has not been efficient, and that's something we talked about in the offseason. It's a guy that everyone was waiting for his ascension, but he was never able to really step into that role and really vulture any of Dalvin Cook's targets. So I had a lot of concerns about him coming in and being the main workhorse with so much inefficiency through his first 4 seasons. And that has come home to roost, and he has not been very well. They traded for Cam Akers, but overall the running game is just so subpar. And guess what? That means they'll go, if they don't trust the running game, the ball's going to be put in the hands of the quarterback even more. And why wouldn't you when you have the best wide receiver in the game in Justin Jefferson, who's just an alien? I don't think he's human. He's that good. And you have Jordan Addison, who's just been incredible as a rookie. And we can throw in KJ Osborne. He's had a couple big games in the first couple weeks here too. And then not to mention, you do have a top 3 tight end in the NFL with TJ Hawkinson. Yeah, he's pretty good as well. So with those weapons to throw to, it's no wonder that Kirk Cousins is having such an easy time putting up monster numbers in the passing game. And also the defense for the Vikings is horrible. They shipped off Za'Darius Smith to the Browns this offseason in a trade for like a 5th round pick. They really haven't done much to improve or bolster their defensive line. So there's not really going to be any game scripts that they're going to be in where they have to just run out the clock or just run the ball. It's always going to be high scoring games. We've seen this with the over-unders repeatedly for the Minnesota Vikings week in and week out. They're always going to be in these dogfights, these shootouts. It's always going to be the ball in Kirk Cousins' hands to try to pass, to try to score. And it's always going to be really good game scripts for him to keep, driving fantasy points. So yeah, not surprised. Let's talk about the other end of the quarterback spectrum. Justin Fields at quarterback 18. Sound the alarm bells. For all the most ridiculous argument I've heard amongst fantasy analysts for Justin Fields is that it took him until week 6 to figure out the offense, for Matt Eberflus to figure out the offense in 2022. Then he became a fantasy winner for a lot of people. You don't do that 2 years in a row, guys. Once you figure it out, you don't regress and have to figure it out again. This was the year that Justin Fields was supposed to take a step up, to become a better passer, not regress and then try to get back to where he was at the end of 2022. So I have major concerns about what Justin Fields can actually produce for fantasy football going forward, and I'm not sticking around to see if he can, reclaim whatever he had at the end of last year. That was just not what we expected coming into the season, not adding DJ Moore just so he could regress. This was supposed to be him taking the next leap. And, there were major concerns that we talked about him not being able to take this next step when it came to the passing game. We may just be taking that for granted as a fantasy community. We saw Josh Allen do it. We saw Lamar Jackson do it. We saw Patrick Mahomes do it to a degree. We saw Jalen Hurts do it last season. And, you give him a great wide receiver, you build the offense around them, they take the next step. Doesn't always happen. And we've seen way too many instances of it failing, but we just are clouded by this rose-colored glasses of recency bias with some of those names I just mentioned. So is also, taking the next step. Why we were so easily predicting Jalen Hurts take the next step was he was a guy that progressed as a passer. His passer rating increased by 10 points for like the past 4 or 5 years or something through his time at Alabama to Oklahoma, to the first 2 years of his NFL career, he always continued to increase and progress as a passer. He showed that he was a student of the game and continues to develop. That wasn't really the case for Justin Fields. He was not an elite passer, but he was an excellent passer at Ohio State. And then when he came to the NFL, he regressed mightily as a passer. And I think it's easier to project someone to continue to grow if they've been showing a path of progression through the past 3 years, rather than someone who's been at this level, regressed, and now is trying to recoup what he has lost as a passer. And I just never was confident that Justin Fields was going to be able to do that and get back to his Ohio State levels. So, yeah, there's already rumblings that Chicago is looking towards next year. People are bailing out of their Chicago Bears takes. Someone's head's going to roll with the Chicago Bears staff, apart from the defensive coordinator that was already let go or retired or whatever that whole situation happened this past season. And they're looking on to move on from Justin Fields with a new quarterback next season, which would not entirely surprise me at this point. And frankly, Justin Fields is not a guy I really want to put at the helm of my fantasy team going forward. I think this is a trend of mediocrity that will continue for the rest of the season. Now let's talk about a guy that's a little bit more difficult to discuss at the quarterback position. He's currently the quarterback 20. That is Jaguars quarterback Trevor Lawrence. And this is, again, a tough one because he came out looking so good in week 1 with a Calvin Ridley connection, but it has been truly abysmal over the next 2 games. Coming in at quarterback 30 in week 2, and then he got a little bit better in week 3, but it was not something you wanted to, with only 14 fantasy points in a 4-point passing league, not something you would ever going to write home about. The offensive line is struggling. You bring in Anton Harrison. You did sign a new offensive line to replace the guy that went to the Chiefs. Can't remember his name right now. Juwan Taylor, maybe. He leaves, go to the Chiefs. So there is a lot of movement on the offensive line, and it looks like he had a struggle through the first couple games. Hopefully, with Anton Harrison coming in, being a rookie, needing time to develop, that will get better over the course of the season. You also brought in Calvin Ridley. This is his first season, and despite being good in week 1, he still took 2 years off of football. It's going to take him some time to get back, get his body adjusted to football. He said he was, quite banged up after week 1, just getting back into the bumps and bruises of a normal NFL game. You're bringing in Tank Bigsby as a complimentary back to Travis Etienne, trying to bring him along as a rookie. There's just a lot of new and rookie pieces to this offense that I think it's going to take time for it to develop over the course of the season. So I predict that it might be a slow start for the Jaguars, but they are in an easy AFC South conference. Things will start to mesh. The rookies will start to progress a little bit. Calvin Ridley will start to regain some of that NFL play speed and the play strength that he had. The offensive line will start to mesh. Trevor Lawrence will become a little bit more comfortable the way he was at the end of last season, and I project him to get better, and he'll probably finish, around QB 10 or something. So I wouldn't, throw the challenge flag or wouldn't sound the alarms on Trevor Lawrence just yet. Let's talk about tight ends. So currently tight end 2 is Sam Laporta. And we can talk about how good Sam Laporta has been, how he's on the, he's on pace to set the rookie records for both receiving yards and receptions for a rookie tight end. I mean, he's been heavily utilized. I don't think his utilization is going to dip even with Jamison Williams coming back in the offense. They do 2 entirely separate things. But let's just talk about the state of tight ends for a second. There's a tight end for the New England Patriots. His name is Pharaoh Brown. He has played in 1 game this season. He has caught 1 pass this season. He's currently the tight end 20. Tight ends suck. They're awful. They are so irrelevant, and I don't know. I can't, slam or slander Sam Laporta for being as good as he is through 3 games as a rookie, but the whole tight end landscape is so sketchy that one guy with 1 touchdown catch is currently the tight end 20 in half-point PPR. So let's calm down about tight ends and focus on the actual positions that matter. This is why we punt the tight end position so often in our drafts. Just remember this. Moving on, I don't want to waste any more time talking about tight ends. Let's wrap it up. We got some wide receivers to talk about. We'll kind of follow the same format that we did for the running backs. 3 guys that are ranked really highly, and whether they continue that. 3 guys that are ranked really lowly, and think if they're going to stay down there as bottom feeders or if they can bounce back throughout the later half of the season. So number 1 wide receiver I want to talk about is the wide receiver 11 on the season so far, and that's going to be Michael Pittman. And this is for real. I'm in on Michael Pittman. I am a believer. He is a true alpha wide receiver. I mean, we just look at this guy. I mean, again, look at the eye test. He goes out there. He's insanely athletic. His prowess as a receiver, his route running, his at the catchability, ability to high point the ball. He has got it. He is there. He is that dude. I am in on Michael Pittman. And he's done it with two quarterbacks so far. He did it being a top 20 wide receiver with Anthony Richardson, who, again, I will reiterate, is not as raw as people thought he was. I think a lot of this whole such a raw prospect coming out into the draft from Florida, that was really overblown throughout the draft process. And I think he's much more capable of helming an offense than we initially thought. And honestly, that could also be due in part to the fact that Shane Steichen is just that good of a coach. He's putting Anthony Richardson and Gardner Minshew in positions where they can win and where they can each respectively drive efficient offenses. So we look at a coaching situation that is running a great offense, an offensive line that has completely, turned it around from being abysmal in 2022. They actually look quite competent coming into the first 3 games of the season. We have quarterbacks who are running good offenses with schemes each designed for them, whether it's Gardner or Anthony Richardson. Let's just think back to prior to the 2022 season where Michael Pittman was talked about as a top 10 wide receiver for Dynasty. He was a top 15 wide receiver in redraft. He was going in the 4th, 5th rounds of drafts because everyone believed in the talent, believed in his prowess as a wide receiver. And they're like, wow, this guy with Matt Ryan coming in, throwing him the ball, just completely elevating the passing game. This dude is going to feast. Well, guess what? Matt Ryan fell off really, really quickly, and it was a really disappointing situation for Michael Pittman in 2022. But now that there's actually a competent coach running this offense and, putting schemes in place where, there's actually pass yards materializing, and even if, for your opinion, if Anthony Richardson or Gardner Minshew are not as competent passers as Matt Ryan was, they certainly are both getting the ball downfield. They're both airing it out a little bit more, and they're just letting the talented Michael Pittman go to work. I think Anthony Richardson, he comes back, continues to develop as a passer. This offense under Shane Steichen continues to improve, become explosive. Michael Pittman will finish as, a top 15 wide receiver, and I believe this guy's, the trend so far for him is for real. Let's talk about another guy who is wildly underrated based on the situation coming into the 2023 season, and that's the wide receiver 10 overall in Bucs wide receiver Mike Evans. And he could be a lot higher based on, I don't know if I had incorporated the Monday night game into this, but he could be a lot higher than wide receiver 10 at this point. Are we really surprised? This is a wide receiver that has had 7 straight 1,000-yard receiving seasons. This dude's a Hall of Famer. No question about it. And somehow Baker actually looks good passing the ball behind a little bit of a decrepit Tampa Bay offensive line. But I really do think Baker Mayfield has been underrated and really unfairly judged just because he was shipped out of the Browns. But if you look back and, you take whatever bias or preconceived notions you have against Baker out of this, and you talk about what he did for the Browns, he was actually a really, really competent quarterback. He had 2 really good seasons, one under Freddie Kitchens and one under Kevin Stefanski. And if Deshaun Watson doesn't come on the market, I really think that Baker Mayfield gets a contract similar to Daniel Jones. It was just the fact that, they thought they were so close, that they had the pieces in place, and they just needed that one elite quarterback to push them over the top, and they went out and made the big splash for a guy that they thought was that upgrade at quarterback. But just because he was a bit of an upgrade in their eyes doesn't mean he was a bad quarterback. And listen, right now, would you rather have Daniel Jones or Baker Mayfield? I don't know. I think I'd rather have Baker based on the performance through 2023. So just going to say that we get slightly influenced by the way situations play out with teams, the way contracts are handed out. But overall, I think it's been unfair for Baker and how he's judged. And again, same thing we talked about with Minnesota. This is a team where the run game has been inefficient. Rachaad White, when he gets out into space, he looks incredible, but behind the offensive line, averaging about 2 yards per carry, and that's really not good to get the run game going. It's been, any way that, but prior to the loss last night to the Eagles, the only way they have won was to continue to air out the ball, getting their wide receivers involved, and they are trusting the ball in Baker Mayfield's hands quite a bit, and there's, he's been one of the higher passing yardage quarterbacks through the first 3 games of the 2023 season, and, who's beneficiary of that? It's Mike Evans. So just with the talent, with the sheer talent, with Baker looking better than people gave him credit for, with how the season is going to play out, I do think that Mike Evans does finish as a top 15 wide receiver, that this trend is for real. Let's jump a little bit ahead. Just jump a little bit higher on this list. And when you look at the wide receiver 7, is currently Adam Thielen of the Carolina Panthers. This is incredible, but no. He scored over half his points in a week 3 game. He had 150 receiving yards and a touchdown on 11 catches. So, wildly inflated because of that. But that was with Andy Dalton as the quarterback, and in a game script that was heavily favoring the pass game, as they were losing by around 9. They were losing, 1 to 2 scores whole game to Seattle, which, prompts them to want to stay in it to try to push for that comeback, but you have to push the ball down the field and score quickly, obviously favoring a pass game rather than a run game. With Andy Dalton, there are certain things that Andy Dalton can do well, and facilitating a decent passing offense is one of them, but in no way, shape, or form, despite Andy Dalton might being a better quarterback at this current moment in time in week 3, that doesn't mean that Andy Dalton's a better quarterback overall than Bryce Young, and Bryce Young is still a rookie developing to the NFL offense. And I truly believe that Bryce Young will certainly become more adept and develop as the season progresses. But right now, with Bryce Young as the quarterback, it's just not going to really result in these massive blow-up games that Adam Thielen enjoyed in week 3. Also, we have to pay attention to the fact that Jonathan Mingo left the game with a concussion, meaning that there's only more targets force-fed Adam Thielen's way. With Mingo back in the lineup, with Bryce Young coming back, I just think that ceiling that he had, it drops down quite a bit, and it's really skewed based on that one week 3 game with so many outlying factors that skewed his score way higher than we really anticipated it being going into that game. Let's look at some other wide receivers that, it's been a bit rough start to the season for them, and number 1 is going to be our wide receiver 28 in the season, and that is Garrett Wilson. Unfortunately, this is a trend that I do not see ending. Garrett Wilson is so freaking talented. Like, the man is unreal, and we all saw the catch from week 1. It was just unbelievable. But the Zach Wilson effect cannot be stopped. His incompetence is a plague that permeates throughout the entire offense and negatively impacts every single player on the Jets. The run game hasn't been good. The passing game hasn't been good. It's just been, there's all this hype around the Jets has just been, absolutely squashed in the mediocrity of Zach Wilson being the offensive coordinator back, or being the quarterback. And at this point, what do the Jets do? Is there another quarterback that they could trade for, or another quarterback they could go out and sign that's going to be, an upgrade over Zach Wilson? I don't think so. I mean, Jameis Winston has to play for the Saints because Derek Carr looks to be out for a little bit. I don't know. I mean, we could sit here, talk about, have a 30-minute discussion about, what quarterbacks, what moves could the Jets make? Because, I mean, I've heard certain Jets pundits talk about, it's a disservice to the Jets not to go and try and win it this year. They've made the moves to be a competitive team this year, to be a playoff team this year, but it's just never going to actually materialize with Zach Wilson as the quarterback. So they could try to make a move for, another quarterback, but there's just not anyone of the caliber, even of Aaron Rodgers, that they could bring in that would elevate this team significantly enough to actually be competitive at a level that they think they were at prior to the Aaron Rodgers injury. And to any quarterback they bring in that might be, marginally better than Zach Wilson, it's going to get them, it's only going to be detrimental to the team because it'll get them a higher record. But again, I don't think there's any quarterback that could elevate them currently as where they stand to a playoff team. So all they're doing is just worsening their draft pick that they thankfully got back from the conditional terms of the Green Bay Packers trade with Aaron Rodgers. But yeah, overall, this is a really rough season for Garrett Wilson. I think the way you deal with Garrett Wilson is you just adjust your expectations. You start him because he's too talented not to start, but you look at him as more of a wide receiver 2 rather than, this high-end potential wide receiver 1 kind of guy. Let's go down a little bit further down the board. We have our wide receiver 36, a guy that a lot of people, I know a lot of people cape for this guy year in and year out because he's been doing it at a high level for a long time, but it's Tyler Lockett is down here all the way at wide receiver 36, barely a wide receiver 3. But I think based on what we've seen on display for the first 3 games of the season is that the volatility of Tyler Lockett this season is going to be something that it's going to be really frustrating to deal with for fantasy managers. He was wide receiver 88 in week 1. Then he comes to wide receiver 6. And in week 3, he's back down to wide receiver 52. There's just a lot of options in this offense. I mean, they brought in 2 offensive players in the first 2 rounds in Zach Charbonnet and Jackson Smith and Jigba. And, Jackson Smith and Jigba has been a guy that's immediately taken to the field, immediately taken a significant snap share. And I just think the way that Jackson Smith and Jigba plays the game, lining up primarily in the slot, being, not as big of a wide receiver, because really who is as big of a wide receiver as DK Metcalf, as he continues to develop as a rookie throughout this season, he's going to continue to take over Tyler Lockett's snaps and the targets that Tyler Lockett would normally enjoy. And this is not to say that Tyler Lockett is not incompetent. He's still a credible wide receiver. We saw that with that insane performance he put up and those insane touchdown catches he had in week 2, but it's just going to be incredibly, incredibly volatile. We'll see his targets more sporadic throughout just how the way the game flows. And again, as we mentioned with Kenneth Walker, Pete Carroll is a guy that just loves to establish the run. He's a guy that wants to build a foundational team with their identity as running the ball and then engage the rest of the plays from either play action or the threat of the running back coming out and ripping off a big chunk of yards. So, it's never going to be an offense that's going to be adequate to sustain 3, not even high end, but 3 adequately good wide receivers. And as JSN continues to develop, who's going to fall off? Probably Tyler Lockett, given that he's on the wrong side of 34 wide receiver. So he will have his upside games. He will have the big breakout games. We saw that in week 2, but the volatility will generally leave you frustrated as a fantasy manager. And I just think he continues this trend of finishes outside of a wide receiver too. Our last guy I want to talk about right here, we're going to wrap it up, talking about the wide receiver 47 who ended up going in the 4th round of fantasy drafts. I do not understand why people drafted this guy this high. This was baffling to me. Wide receiver 47 is Tennessee Titans wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins. And again, I can't really say this is surprising. This is a Tennessee Titans team that they had the worst passing offense. Whether you talk about passing yards, whether you talk about passer rating, passer efficiency rating, any metrics you want to measure it by, it has been the worst passing offense over the past 2 years. And Tannehill came out in 3 games and proved that that's not changing anytime soon in 2023. You're just never going to have, despite the talent that DeAndre Hopkins possesses, you're just never going to have that upside of a high-end wide receiver with such poor passing, whether it's the lack of passes that Tannehill's attempting or the wild inaccuracy of the passes that he is throwing. But it's just never going to have that upside. You can never get those high-end wide receivers on wide receivers that are averaging 4 to 5 targets a game like DeAndre Hopkins. And I mean, this is also a team, with Derrick Henry, with Tajay Spears, such high day 2 draft capital. They're going to run the ball. They're a physical team. That's what their identity has been under Mike Vrabel, and they're going to continue to just play smash mouth football. And even in negative game scripts, they will continue to run the ball. So he is a great wide receiver, but I just don't think for his age, his injury history, the way Mike Vrabel has his team set up, the way he builds confidence in players, and just the inadequacy of Ryan Tannehill as a competent quarterback at this point in his career, I just don't see DeAndre Hopkins, being able to overcome the situation that he's currently in, and will kind of, I project him to finish as a wide receiver 3 or worse the rest of the season on. That's not to say you can't have, a big blow-up game with 2 touchdowns. He still has that talent. It's just that consistency over the course of the season is going to be something, it's going to leave a lot desired. So that's going to wrap it up. Again, a little bit of a longer video, but we talked about all these guys that are either trending or ending, whether I see, them continuing to be successful for fantasy or continue to leave you wanting more. And if you should wait out, and for the guys that leave you wanting more, whether you should wait out the storm or whether you should just move off them now before their value becomes something that you cannot possibly recover from. So let me know what you guys thought about this down in the comments below. Again, I want to do shout out, go follow me on TikTok. There's been a lot of great engagement over on that platform, especially I think it does better for the shorts. And as always, on YouTube, I do post the shorts, but I think it gets better visibility over on TikTok posting, it's kind of like my guys section, my predictions, my start sits for each week. So I'll try to post 5 to 10 of those over on here on YouTube, but over on TikTok as well. But I just think, it's going to be a better viewing experience for you guys over on TikTok. So go check me out there. Shameless plug. Sorry I had to do it to you guys, but overall, hope you guys enjoyed the video and looking forward to a great week of week 4. Should be a fun one of the last weeks before buys, and then next week we'll jump into, with 4 weeks done, we can jump into our quarter season review. So that should be a fun video as well. But until then, guys, take care.